Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Hockey Writers Fantasy Forecheck podcast. As always, I am your host, Jacob Strozyk, joined by my co-host.
Jacob Billington. Not lovely today?
Uh, you know, you were late to the recording, so we're not going to call you lovely, so we're just going to leave it at that. How's that sound?
Fair enough. I deserve that one.
Gotta dig at you a little bit every now and again. So for this week, we're going to be going through the top five players at each position as sort of our own like fantasy all-star show. So we're going to go through our own list of what we have on each player at the major positions and which is which ones have the most fantasy value, not necessarily individually for us, but what we feel kind of as a whole for all fantasy leagues that we participate in and anybody else might participate in. But before we get started, we're going to do our question of the week, and it's very simple. To make it a little bit more personal, amongst the leagues that you do participate in, who has been your biggest fantasy all-star for your teams? How did you get them, and why would you pick them?
That's pretty easy actually. So in our league, the Hockey Writers League, I got Elias Pettersson, who honestly I didn't even want, but I couldn't let him go any further, and it was kind of he was at the back half. I believe he was my first pick, and it was just late enough in the draft that I was like, I can't let him slide anymore. He's not really who I want though. But now he's been fantastic for me and can't complain.
I traded Pedersen a couple of years ago, and I'm kicking myself over it now.
Yeah.
But hindsight is 2020. If I had to pick an all-star for me, I have this player in both my leagues. It's going to be Connor Ingram because goaltending is always an issue for me. But this year, he puts up shutout after shutout, win after win, and it's nice to be riding the Coyotes wagon all the way to the end of the season.
Yeah. Well, can't
But
go
he
wrong
was.
there. And you probably got him at really good value, whether he was even probably free agency after the draft.
I picked him up on waivers for both leagues. Not a single
Yeah.
person thought to grab him, and I picked him up right before he started getting really, really hot. After I
Yeah.
think it was his first or second shutout, and I was like, "This is going to get good. I'm going to grab him before somebody else thinks about it."
Yeah.
And it was huge, so I'm loving it. All right, we have one, two. We only have a handful of categories to go through. Where do you want to start? You want to do right wing, left wing, center, defense, goalies? That's what we got. What do you want to roll with?
Let's start with what I thought was the hardest one, and that's goaltending.
Goaltending. All right. Well, who's your number one? Let's
N
fight about it.
Number one was very easy, and that was Connor Hellebuck, who you left off your
Okay.
top 10 in the summer.
Well,
Just saying, have to bring it up.
that's
Um,
fine.
yeah, so I've got him number one, and just even strictly for that 35 game stretch that the Jets let in three or less goals in each of those games. Like if you're losing goaltender weeks and you have Hellebuck and anybody decent, then there's a huge problem. But yeah, Hellebuck is just the way to go this year.
Yeah, I have Hellebuck at my number one spot too, so I'm more than happy to eat my words on that. Anybody who listened to me, I apologize for that. Anybody who didn't listen to me,
You're welcome.
just yeah, thank Billington for that and fighting me every step of the way.
I think I had him
That's what
fourth.
it is.
I think I had him
You know,
fourth in the
fourth.
preseason, maybe fifth.
Even so, that's still a pretty good spot to pick somebody up.
Yeah,
But yeah, he's undoubtedly the best fantasy goaltender. He's got wins, saves, goals against, and saves. Like he's doing it all.
yeah.
So one for Hellebuck. Who's two?
Number two, I've got Thatcher Demko, pretty much for all the same reasons. The Vancouver Canucks are just a wagon. There's no slowing them down, and I don't know. There's just Demko has never really stood out to me. I always kind of put him in the same category as Carter Hart, where it's just like they always have it, but they never really show that they can do it consistently. Yes, he had some good stretches, especially in the playoffs. He had some good runs, but he never put it all together for a full season. So I was a bit lower on him headed into the season, but he's just proved everybody wrong this year.
Yeah, he's had a really great season. I don't have him at two. I have Demko at my third spot.
Yep.
So same type of argument for him is it's just part of the Vancouver wagon that just keeps on rolling.
Yeah.
He gets just about everything that you could possibly imagine. Wins. He's got solid numbers overall, and he's currently tied for the shutout lead with Connor
Yep.
Ingram. So low goals, and that's really
Yeah.
what matters in fantasy. My number two, I have good old Stuart Skinner. And I knew you were going to make that face at me when I said it.
Yeah.
But my reasoning is since their terrible start to the season, he has been one of the best goaltenders in the league as
Yeah.
soon as the Oilers started picking it up. And it's largely in part to their coaching change and a handful of their stars picking it up. But it also matters that Skinner is still performing up to a ridiculous level right now. And I think continuing forwards as the Oilers keep, you know, moving along, I think he's worth just a little bit more than Demko right now. Just a touch.
I don't even have him top five. I'll be honest
That's
with you.
fine. That's
Um, and
fine.
and I've said this 100 times on this podcast before. It's I don't like the streaky players. That really, really bad start scares me. It was miserable when Jack Campbell got sent down. Everybody pointed and laughed at how bad his numbers were. He was the better goalie of the two at the time. They just couldn't waive Skinner because they would lose him. Um, I, I, I understand everything that you're saying, and maybe in general, yeah, he's a top five goalie right now. But as the whole season goes on, he's not somebody I would look at as one of the first five goalies I would pick if we were doing a draft today.
Fair enough. And that's why it's an individual list. We each
Yeah.
have our own kind of take on it. And that's me just I have more of a belief in Skinner. That's
Yeah.
all it is.
Is that just because he's on your team?
Well, I if I didn't believe in him and he was on my team, I would have dropped him when he had that bad streak.
Yeah,
But I held
that's
on
fair.
to him throughout the whole thing because I was like, he can do better than this. I know
Yeah.
he's better than this. And now I get to reap those rewards.
Yeah, that's fair.
Who do you got for three?
Number three, I've got Linus Ullmark. And it's again same reason as Demko and Hellebuck. Well, maybe not Hellebuck, but just the Bruins are so good. And Ullmark is fantastic as well. It's not just team success that's getting him on this list, but the Bruins are incredible. And as you can see later when we go down my list, doesn't matter what goalie they have in net, they're going to win games.
Yeah, I didn't have them. I would have put them at my number six
Yeah,
spot, honestly, and they could easily move up into the number five. And all year I've put Allmark and Swayman kind of in that same boat because they're the same basic goaltender. I think Swayman has
yeah,
slightly better numbers right now.
yeah,
But just as a whole, the Bruins play great defense, so their goaltending is going to be great. I don't have any issues with either of them being a top five pick because you can make an argument for either.
yeah.
Four.
Right. So number four, and I did not think I would be saying this year, is Sergei Bobrovsky. I've got Bobrovsky number four. He's getting a ton of wins. He's got great stats this year. Not like Vezina caliber stats, but with his good enough individual stats, plus all of the wins that he's collecting with the Florida Panthers, that's just huge success. Wins are worth so much, in most leagues at least. And so you look at the Panthers, and they're just I think they're sitting fourth in the NHL right now, and Bobrovsky is a huge part of that.
Yeah, I had Bobrovsky at five, kind of for the same reasons. And I saw an interesting stat when I was kind of going through all of the individual pieces to kind of pick how I would go through this. He only has three more goals against compared to Demko. So, as far as getting scored on, he might not be facing as many shots,
Yeah,
but he's still making a great amount of saves and he's getting those wins. So I would put Demko personally at five, which would bring me to my four, just to kind of do it in retrospect, is, as I said before, Connor Ingram. Bit of a
yeah,
biased take here, but like I said, he's leading. He's tied for the league lead with Demko in shutouts. He's getting a good amount of wins. He's playing a lot of great teams and still getting wins. So pushing forward, he's a solid fantasy asset. I don't think he's really rostered at a low rate in any way, shape, or form at this point.
yeah,
But if you have him and you're looking to upgrade, he could be a great sell high candidate.
yeah. Well, yeah, like if you would have told me that at the All-Star break, Connor Ingram's going to have 17 wins and a 916 save percentage, I would laugh at you. And there's nothing else about it. Like he's just impressed absolutely everybody and still being slept on. I did check earlier today, and he's rostered at 80% on Yahoo, I believe. And
Yeah,
he was right there just at the edge of the top five for me. And you know what? I kind of had a little bit of a cop out, and I put Swayman at five. I might bump him and merge him and Ulmer together and have Ingram at my five.
I wouldn't blame you.
Yeah.
Well, all right. I think that sums up goaltending pretty well. It's it's kind of shocking that it's not some other names up in this list. No Ottinger, no Shesterkin, no Sorokin, some of those big names that we were talking about
Definitely
earlier
no
in the year.
Vasilevsky. He has not been good.
Yeah, he's not been great, but he's probably still kind of recovering from his, I think it was back surgery, if I
Yeah.
remember correctly. So that's not going to be easy to come back from as a goaltender, especially somebody of his caliber. But
Yeah.
maybe we'll see a bounce back next year. It's nice to see a little bit of a change of the guard for this season.
Well, and I've said it plenty of times on this show again, but I have Sorokin and Vasilevsky, and I'm losing almost every week in goaltending. Like, what can a fella do?
Uh, Cry at this
Yeah,
point for
pretty
what happened
much.
to the team. It's just disappointing at that point.
Yeah.
Well, alrighty. What do you want to roll into next?
Let's just work our way out. Let's go defense.
Defense. All right. I'll start it out. It's a zero question for me. It's Quinn Hughes.
Yeah.
He's the best overall fantasy defenseman this year, and his points and power play points and plus minus, everything is just kind of carrying him all the way up there. He's still not a big hitter, so you're not going to get anything out of him there. But for pretty much every other major category, he's going to give you something, and he's doing it constantly this year.
Yeah, like there's not even a conversation to be had about him being first. There's obviously some fantastic defensemen in the NHL that are great for fantasy, but Quinn Hughes is just another step, maybe even two steps above the rest of them this year.
Yeah, I don't. I can't say that I saw it coming. I don't remember if I had him in my top 10 during the preseason discussion, but
We must have. We must have both had him top 10.
there had to be something because he's just popping off and it's great.
Yeah.
Number two.
You want me to go?
Yeah, go ahead.
I got Cale McCarr. Just like, does that even need much of an explanation? He's just
Not
so
really.
fantastic in every category, every zone, everything that you need from a defenseman. Cale McCarr brings it, and again, he's right there with Quinn Hughes, number one and two, almost undisputedly. But he's just about a half step behind him right now.
Yeah, and half step is even feeling like a hot take just because they're neck and neck,
Yeah,
so close in points and just about everything else. So same reason for Makaris Hughes. I also have him at two.
yeah.
So let's slide right into number three. Who you got?
Number three, I've got Evan Bouchard. He's just, I had him pretty high in the preseason, but he started off really slow. Probably suggested to trade him at some point while his, or sorry, trade for him while his value was really low.
Mhm.
But he's just turned it up, and he's been absolutely fantastic with the Oilers, especially during this win streak that they're on. There's no slowing them down, and Evan Bouchard is a huge part of it in every category.
Yeah, we were definitely very high on Bouchard in the preseason. We both kind of were talking a big game for him. I have him at four instead of my three spot, but yeah, he's producing offensively, he's producing defensively, so he's
Yeah,
giving you all of the right metrics on your fantasy team that you might have gotten him for a bit of a steal if people weren't necessarily paying attention earlier on in your drafts.
yeah.
So right about now is when I would start telling people while you're putting together your dynasty and you're putting together your keeper list, he would be one of my keeper defensemen that I would highly recommend putting on that list.
Absolutely. He's a number one guy on any fantasy team.
Yeah. So that'll bring me to my number three, since we did my four, and that's Noah Dobson. Huge, huge, huge uptick in fantasy production this year, and just in fantasy value as a whole. I I remember saying a couple weeks ago that he's making a case for being a top five fantasy defenseman,
Yeah,
and yeah, this is me sticking him right at number three for this season at least, because he does just about everything that Makar and Hughes are doing, and on top of that, he's doing it on a depleted Islanders team, and he's also
yeah.
getting blocks, hits. He's doing it. He's doing everything. So it's almost carbon copy, copy paste between what these top five are doing, but
Yeah.
it's just utilizing them and being able to recognize that pick before somebody else did.
Well, and like so we talked about Hughes and McCarr and how they're neck and neck for that number one spot. Bouchard and Dobson, 100% interchangeable, and I have him number four. And not even really for any reason. I just had to pick one to be above the other. They're pretty much neck and neck for me.
Yeah, so we wholeheartedly agree on that. Number five is
Yeah.
where we might split, so let's see where this takes us.
Yeah, so it was a really, really difficult pick. There's a lot of guys that kind of they're getting the points, they get the hits as well. Some of them are just on really good teams, not doing as much. Some of them have been disappointing, but I went with Victor Hedman, who quite a resurgence this year. Um, he looked like he was starting to slow down, but he's got a ton of points this year, especially for Victor Hedman of the past few years. He still gets the hits and blocks, and it just contributes in every way possible.
Yeah, I don't really have an argument. Picking that five spot was tough because I was kind of picking
Yeah,
between Hedman, Darlene, and the guy that I went with, which was Adam Fox. I
yeah,
put Fox there mostly because the Rangers aren't doing spectacular right now. They're in a bit of a slump, but he's
yeah,
still keeping pace with everything. He's still scoring points. He's still getting blocks. He's still doing everything that Adam Fox does supremely well. And I think that ups his fantasy value right now. So that's kind of why I put him there as opposed to the other ones. But you can really it's close. It's close in the top
yeah,
10 for defensemen, really.
yeah. There's a lot of guys that are worth any of these picks. Like you could tell me that whoever I have at 4, you would have at 8 or 9, and I'm perfectly justified. There's not much of a difference between these top 10, top 5 defensemen.
Yeah, it's not like it was earlier in the year where you can really make a case for this guy over this guy over this one guy.
Yeah,
When it comes to the production for this season, it's so close, and it's actually been really fun to have while you've been playing fantasy this year.
yeah.
All right, that did you do your five?
Yes, number 5 was Hedman.
Hedman. Okay, God,
Yeah.
God, it shows how much I'm paying attention right now. My brain is just scrambled. All right, let's take it up to the top. Let's do left wingers.
All right. Number 1, I can't even believe these words are coming out of my mouth. But right now, the best fantasy left winger in the NHL is Zach Hyman.
I I'm going to argue that he's number one because I have him at my 4 spot. But give me your logic for number one.
He scores so many goals. He's doing so good in Edmonton. I'm gonna actually pull up his stats right here so I make sure I'm not lying to myself. But he just scores a ton of goals. He gets the hits. He gets the blocks. Um, and just getting his season stats up. Yeah, 47 points already. He does everything that you need him to do. He's not necessarily a blocker or a hit per game, although I would argue that he should have 4 hits every game. But on the stats, he does not have a hit and a block for each game he's played. But the 30 goals is just unreal.
Yeah, Hyman. I know we talked about him in the preseason because
Yeah,
I remember he was poised to have a huge, huge year last year, and I was like, I think he'll do even better this season.
yeah,
So I have Hyman at 4, so he's still in my top 5. I don't think I have a way to justify putting him above some of the other ones that I do have,
yep,
but you can still make that type of argument when you have such a complete player like him.
yeah. And his assists are down from last year. He finished last year with 47, and he only has 17 so far this year. So if he could get his assists up a little bit, then I think, for me at least, certainly the number 1.
Yeah, that'll come with more production out of his all-star line mates,
Yeah,
depending on who he's being cycled between right now. My number 1, Artemi Panarin. He's leading in points. Not the lead, but he's leading the left wingers in points right now.
yeah,
And he's had some ridiculously long point streaks throughout the year. There really hasn't been a game that he doesn't put up at least an assist or two. So his consistency this season, I think, puts him at that top spot, especially with his power play production on top of it. If the Rangers were doing better, I think he might be doing even better than he already is.
yeah,
But right now, I think the Rangers' struggles come down to their goaltending more than anything else,
yeah.
unfortunately.
So I'm gonna be honest. I had Panarin at 3, but I just pulled up
Okay.
his stats in front of me. I didn't realize that he had 30 goals on the season, which is unreal.
Yeah.
So I might bump him up to my number 1. I thought he was just an assist merchant, which is totally fine. but I didn't
Normally he
realize he had
is.
30 goals. So I'm gonna bump him up to my number one, bump Hyman down to number two.
And like I said, there's plenty of reasons to want Hyman that high, and I get it.
Yeah,
So that's your one and two. My number two is Philip Forsberg, and it is spectacular to see him healthy, and he's
yeah,
contributing in every fantasy aspect. He's throwing hits, he's getting blocks. He's not throwing hits at a ridiculous rate, but he is throwing some hits enough to up the fantasy value a little bit. He's getting a good amount of blocks to go with it, and he's
yeah.
scoring at a very high pace. So I think if he continues to remain healthy, there's that asterisk constantly next to Forsberg.
Yeah.
If he remains healthy, he'll continue to be a top fantasy left winger this season.
Yeah, I agree. I have him in my number three. There's not much to argue about anything with Forsberg. He's just been fantastic for the Predators this year.
Um, my number three, since you mentioned that he's yours, somebody we talked about highly throughout the whole preseason and in general. I put Matt Tkachuk there because he's finally bringing himself up to the pace that he should be, and I think it's worth putting him in that number three spot since the Panthers are playing so ridiculously well now, and he's definitely contributing to that success.
So maybe I should have checked the lines. I'm not sure, but I have Matt Tkachuk under my right wingers.
He's
But
left and right wing. You can interchange
yeah,
it, so we'll
okay,
we'll allow it. Him and
okay,
Brady are listed as left and right in most leagues.
okay. Yeah. So pretty much for all the same reasons, I have Brady in my number four.
There you go.
Just they play the same game. Matthew obviously is getting way more points. Brady's having a bit of a down year in points, but he makes up for that in his hits and his just all that kind of, I guess you would call it the defensive side of fantasy. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, Matthew Tkachuk is fantastic, and I'll talk more about him when we're on the right wingers.
Yeah, Brady Kachuk. We put both of the Kachucks very high on our early season rankings, and it's
Yeah,
for those reasons of complete what we'll call complete category coverage. They get you
yeah,
points, goals, assists, plus minus, hits, blocks, penalty minutes, you name it. They'll put
yeah.
something up at some point in the game, and it gives them more fantasy value than some other just kind of one-dimensional players.
If penalty minutes is a positive thing in your league, trade for Brady Tkachuk. As somebody who covers the
Yes.
Senators, unfortunately, he is second in the NHL in penalty minutes. He's already cracked the 100 penalty minute mark.
Is it fights or is he just
Both, a lot of fights this year. He's already had 38
okay?
career fights.
That's pretty good
That's insane. Drafted,
for the modern NHL. Yeah,
yeah, that's wild to me. 38 fights in his very young career.
penalty minutes, if they are a category, don't usually count for a whole lot. But if you
Yeah,
have somebody who's fighting regularly, you might get some extra points out of that.
yeah.
I mentioned my number four was Zach Hyman. We already went over him. So my number five is Jesper Bratt. And
Okay.
my logic behind it is he's a top producer in the left wing position,
Yeah,
despite New Jersey being a very average team this year. And he's kind of picking up the slack from their injuries
yeah,
to like Jack Hughes and Nico Hischier and some of their other top forwards. And he's still
yeah,
producing at a very, very high rate. So I
yeah.
think he's worth it.
Yeah, I really like Brad. And again, this number five pick, when we get down here, there's four or five guys that each of us could have in here. And there's certainly an argument to be made about them. But yeah, Brad is fantastic. And on a struggling Devils team, he has been one of the few bright spots.
It's unfortunate to see the Devils not doing as well as they could have this year and kind of the
Yeah,
face of the injury bug that's kind of been biting them because there was a
yeah.
lot of fantasy value to be had on that Devils team. So it hurts a little bit if you ask me,
Oh, absolutely. Anybody like if you drafted Jack Hughes top five in your draft this year, you are probably very upset, and rightfully so.
especially if it's a redraft.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's just a rough time to go. All right. Let's do right wingers. Start
My
us
number
off.
five.
Oh, God, I suck today. What is going on? You know what? I quit. You take over the show. Just go. Just go. Just do it.
So
No, go ahead.
number five, I've got Jason Robertson, and again, like you could throw Jesper Brad in there, you could throw Carter Verhaeghe in there, you could throw Kirill Kaprizov. It doesn't matter. This number five spot is so many guys that can do it. But Jason Robertson, while his goal totals are a bit down from his last year, 2 years, he's still playing really well. The Dallas Stars are playing well. Maybe not as well as expected, but they are playing well. Robertson, you absolutely know what he has in the tank. It's just a matter of let's get it all out. Started a bit slow to the season, but he's starting to pick it up, and so I have him number 5.
Yeah, Robertson is definitely a high-end pick, and
Yeah.
I kind of had him cycling between that 5, 6, maybe 7 spot for this season just because he had that slow start, but he is picking it up. You're right. Normally you would expect something close to about 90, maybe 95 or even 100 points out of Robertson. Not
Yeah.
sure if you're going to get that out of him this season, but we'll look more for the bounce back next season if you're looking for that 100-point spot.
Yeah.
All right. If I'm not getting ahead of myself, you can start us off with some right wingers.
Number one, if you have anybody other than Nikita Kucherov here, you're insane. He's like leading the league in points or tied with McKinnon, depends on the night that you look.
Mhm.
He's just doing it all. He's scoring, he's getting the assists. He he's Nikita Kucherov. Everybody knows what he's capable of, and he's really doing it this year now that he's kind of getting a full healthy season.
Yeah, I've seen some things throughout the it was earlier in the season that I saw Kucherov was going in like second, third, fourth rounds in some league. And I was just like, in what world should Nikita Kucherov be going anywhere that low with the type of production that he is capable of? And right now, he's proving all of those doubters wrong. And he's just dominating like we've seen in previous years before he was uh, injured long term,
Yeah.
which is why some people might have been, shy on him. But a healthy Kucherov is dangerous. And I have him at my number one spot too for that same exact reason.
I'm just looking now. Kucherov, so we have an 18-person league, but Kucherov went 14th in our league. And somehow,
That's
how did Kale
technically true.
McCarr fall to 15th in our league? That's insane.
Yeah, I know. That's where I took him.
Yeah, that's insane. I
I
assume you have him
one of
number one
the
too.
picks. Yeah,
What
I
was
had
that?
Kucherov at one.
Okay. Number two, I've got there's a lot of guys like this 2 to 5, very,
Mhm.
very interchangeable on my list.
Yep.
I think this is the clear top 5, in my opinion, but 2 to 5 is very interchangeable. But I went with David Pastrnak, scoring a lot of goals, just doing everything that David Pastrnak does. There's not even anything special about his game. He's just really good at everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Obviously, his shooting is special, but when you look at his fantasy stats, like he's just so well rounded.
Yeah, he's not a one-trick pony.
Yeah,
He is a consistent. I put he's still a top 5 goal scorer in the entire National Hockey League, and that
yeah,
alone brings him to top level fantasy value because
yeah,
even if he wasn't putting up, ridiculous amounts of assists, which he still does, he would still be putting up 50 goals because he was bored this year. And then he can throw up 60 on a great year. I still think he might be able to hit 70 at some point in his career.
yeah.
So I have him at 2 as well. Who do you got for 3?
The power play merchant himself, Sam Reinhart. So he has as many goals as like I don't have the stat in front of me, but his 20 power play goals on the season is as many or more than like 4 NHL teams in total, which is
Yep.
absolutely bonkers. And he's doing so good this year, and he's gonna get paid this year.
Yeah, I am glad to see Reinhardt doing this well. I also have him at my 3 spot. Power play points are worth a lot for just about any league.
Yeah,
Regular goal scoring, he's chasing Matthews for the Rocket Richard. So
yeah.
100% he's at that number 3 spot. Who do you
Yeah.
have for 4?
I've got Matt Kachuk here. So again, you had him on the left, so a little bit different of a list here. But yeah, I've got Matt Kachuk for all the same reasons that you did. He's finally picking it up. He's been on a tear lately. So many points in his last 15 games. Actually, I think he has as many points in his last 16 games as Jonathan Huberdeau does in the season.
Yeah, but what is it to compare to Huberdeau this season when he's
Well,
been
right.
so terrible? But
Yeah.
yeah, seeing Kachuk pick it up has been a breath of fresh air compared to where he was starting the season.
Yeah.
My number 4. easy pick for me, Mikko Rantanen. The Avalanche as a whole are doing ridiculous when it
Yeah.
comes to offense, and he's what I'm he's having what I'm going to call a quietly great year, and it's
Yeah.
only quiet because of how much attention McKinnon is getting. And I think that's the only reason he's being, not downplayed, but maybe overshadowed by him.
Yeah. It's insane to have a team with McKinnon, Rantanen, and Makar. Like,
Yeah.
that's absolutely insane. There's We're gonna talk centers in a few minutes, but to have one of the best centers, one of the best right wingers, and the best defenseman, that's unfair. And to
Yeah.
see them still like not top two or three in the league, that's a bit worrisome.
Goaltending.
But yeah,
Goaltending.
they need Georgiev back to his form that they know he can play.
He's got a sub 900 save percentage. It was 898 the last time I checked.
Yeah,
It's not good enough.
yeah. I do have Rantanen falling out. I would have had him if I didn't have Kachuk in my list,
Hmm.
but my number five is going to be Brock Besser, just on a goal scoring tear. It's like not even funny how good he's doing. And I know our producer Matthew's sitting there smiling as I'm saying this. Um, but yeah, he just scored I believe his 30th goal, which is crazy, and he's on pace for well over 50, probably 54, 55. And yeah, he's been doing so well this year, and it's so good to see because I've always loved Besser, and was in trade rumors. He was supposed to go to Minnesota in the offseason, and I'm so glad that Vancouver didn't trade him because I like seeing success in Vancouver, and I like seeing Brock Besser have success on that team, and he's having a whole whack of it.
I will apologize now for what I said in the offseason of saying avoid Brock Besser like the plague because he had been so disappointing to me
Yeah,
throughout previous fantasy seasons. So I had every logical reason in my brain not to even want to touch him with a 10-foot pole. But seeing that resurgence and seeing what he can pull off, I wouldn't put him in my top five. This season, I would definitely put him in my top 10 because of what he's accomplished and how well he has played. So I don't have him at my five spot, but I'm not going to diminish
yeah,
what he's done to take him out of yours. My five spot, I have Willie Nylander, and I have him kind of, you know, for the sake of what he's been doing over the past handful of years on top of what he's doing this season.
yeah,
So he's getting more consistent, he's scoring goals, and I think that gives him a high enough fantasy value at the right wing position. And it kind of makes him interchangeable with Marner because they
yeah,
both score at similar paces. Marner scores a little bit more assists, but he's not as physical and he doesn't score as many goals. So it's close between the two of them, but I would still put Nylander for this season higher than Marner and Besser and a handful of other guys.
yeah. That's fair, and it was a toss up between Nylander and um Brock Besser. It was really close, but I just went with Besser, and maybe more so because of the story, like just to kind of talk about him a little bit. So
Right. Then let's progress to top five centers.
okay, number one, Nathan McKinnon, just on an
Yeah.
absolute tear this season.
I'm not going to disagree. Go ahead, roll it.
There's nothing stopping McKinnon this year. He's gonna probably win the Art Ross, probably win the Hart at this point. If it's anybody other than McKinnon or Kucherov, then something's wrong or something's up with the voting system. But yeah, McKinnon is just on a whole nother world this year.
Yeah, he is dominating. That's the word I had. Pure domination. He
Yeah,
is without a doubt the best player in the league this season. You can make an argument for Kucherov, absolutely.
yeah,
But to me, McKinnon is the best overall player, fantasy wise, especially this season.
yeah,
So wherever he's gone in most drafts, I would assume anywhere between pick three and pick maybe five at the very lowest,
yeah,
depending on how people would play that out. But this isn't me saying that McKinnon is suddenly the bona fide number one pick in your fantasy draft next year. But I think it gives you a much better case for picking him at one and feeling comfortable about doing it.
yeah. Number two, I've got Austin Matthews. undeniable how good he is at goal scoring. 40 goals at the All-Star break is bonkers. And he's still not even like out of the 50-50 race. He could still do it. He needs, I think, 10 goals in his next 4 games, which is not impossible if you're Austin Matthews.
Yeah, the amount of hat tricks he's had in his career, and on top of that, just the goal scoring pace this season. He's healthy and he's
Yeah.
scoring. He's over whatever problem was ailing him last season when he finished with what, like 42, 44
I think he
goals
finished with 40. He already matched
with
last season's
40.
total.
So he's probably gonna push that. I think he could definitely hit 60 this year. I think
Yeah.
he's gonna push that 70, maybe 70. The number I'm going to throw out is 75. I think he can hit the 75 mark, and it's a
Yeah.
huge number, but I think
Yeah.
it's something that he's capable of. I have Matthews at my 3 spot for the goal scoring reason. His assists aren't as high as they
Yeah.
normally could be, so that takes him down just the slightest minuscule peg. But goal scoring alone is worth a ton in fantasy, and I agree that he could be in that number 2 spot. But my number 2 is McDavid for
Yeah.
the simple reason of he's still Connor McDavid. He's
Yeah.
still producing like he should. He's back to being himself. He's not scoring as many goals as you might be wanting him to, but he's still putting up points and he's still doing multi-point games. He's still going to be on that 100-point pace, and it's going to be a quote unquote down or disappointing year when he
Yeah.
does that.
Yeah. Like we don't even have to say anything about McDavid. Like he's just Connor McDavid. I have him at my 3, and that kind of hurt to put him that low. But it's yeah. There's not even anything else to add. He's Connor McDavid.
All right. So as much as it hurts putting McDavid at your 3 spot and having him at my 2 spot, still, who's your number 3 then? Or that's your number 3. For my number 3, I have Matthews. So let's do number 4.
I've got Sidney Crosby. And in 2024, saying that Sidney Crosby is a top 4 center for fantasy is absolutely insane. But he has not aged a day since he was 24. Like, he's just playing at the same level that he always has. And I love to see it. Obviously, as a Nova Scotian, I'm always rooting for Sidney Crosby. Sometimes it's been hard to root for players like Brad Marchand. But to have Sidney Crosby and Austin Matthews, Nathan McKinnon in here as a Nova Scotian, I just love talking about it. So yeah, Sidney Crosby at my number 4. He just hasn't slowed down. He's still playing absolutely unreal. And at his age, if you take age and like expectations into account, there's no doubt that he should be in the conversation for the Hart as well.
Oh, absolutely. I have Sid. My simple note was Sid still has it.
Yeah,
He's might be getting older, but that doesn't seem to really bother him in any way, shape, or form. I
yeah,
don't have him at my 4 spot, but I did put him at my 5 spot for that
yeah,
same type of reason. He's scoring at a ridiculous pace. He's got great defensive stats, and he's still one of the best face-off people in the
yeah.
entire league. He's just under 60% for his face-offs. I think it was 58.6 or
That's insane.
59.6. And he's always been one of the best face-off players in the league, honestly, since probably like 2010 or 2012, when he
Yeah,
really started that transition into dominance that he
yeah,
really had. So I have Sid at my 5 spot. For my 4 spot, we're gonna make our producer really happy once again, as I say, Elias Pettersson. And he's been an overall center this season and has had a huge bounce back from a bit of a down year last season. And he's scoring, he's getting assists, and he's just doing everything that a top 5 center in the league should be doing.
yeah,
And it's just ridiculous to see how well he is performing. And I think
yeah.
that justifies his number 4 spot.
Yeah, and I have him number 5. So there you go,
All
man.
right.
So I have number 5, and like I said at the beginning of the show, I did not expect this out of him this year. I was a little bit hesitant to pick him. I believe I had the 11th pick when I got him. So good value out of that for sure.
Yeah, I'm not saying that he wouldn't have become this at the start of this season. It's just going or coming into the season from what happened and how kind of average the Vancouver Canucks were
Yeah,
in 22-23. it's a real huge transition to jump up from what they were to what they are, and Pedersen has been a massive part of that.
Yeah,
So it's great. We have a consensus top five. We might not be
we do.
perfectly aligned on what the numbers are, but it's a consensus top five, and I think
Yeah,
that's a big piece of evidence towards what the centers have been doing all season long and how it's going to progress into the end of the season too.
yeah. And just back to Pedersen for a second. It's insane that I have Pedersen at number 5, and I was trying to find a way to squeeze JT Miller in there as well. What a year out of JT Miller. He's had a fantastic comeback season.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I was going through all the stats earlier today again while I was kind of rearranging my list and being like, all right, does this still fit here? Does this guy still fit here? Does this still fit
Yeah,
here? And Miller kept popping up, and I just was like, he's not top five, but I'll be damned if he's not number six or number seven
yeah,
for this season because he's one of those complete fantasy players right now,
yeah,
and he's doing it all.
yeah. I also just want to point out one notable thing that we did not talk about today is the name Leon Draisaitl.
Hmm.
I There's nothing more to it than that. I just wanted to kind of point out that neither of us, whether you wanted to list him as a center or left wing, Leon Draisaitl is not in the conversation, and neither of us have said his name today.
Yeah, and that's a bit disappointing. It's not that he's having a bad overall season. He's
Yeah,
having a bad season by his standards.
yeah, which is insanely high.
And there's a lot of players this season that you can make the argument for they're just not having a great, you know, a great season overall or fantasy season by their own standards. And
Yeah,
we could probably make a separate top five list for each of those at one point. That might be what we do for the next show, really depending on what direction we decide to go to. But boy, oh boy, finding the disappointment from some players has just been brutal this season. Goaltending to left wing and to defense, it's been rough.
trying to find a list of 5 goalies I wanted to praise was impossible.
Yeah. It's
Like,
do you think it's because scoring's up, or do you think just goaltending is not good this year?
yes, a little bit of both.
A little bit both. I mean, I don't see any reason why it couldn't be both, but boy, it's tough. It's tough
Yeah,
to pick out some of these things when it comes to fantasy. And man, I have had a rough go of it for goaltending in the past number of years. I'm just going to
yeah.
say it's fantastic to have picked right this year and have good goaltending.
I tried. I picked 2 of the top 3 goalies in the league. It's not working.
Yeah, it'll be fun during the offseason to see what these rankings end up being, taking into account how seasons finish. So I think
Yeah.
that'll be kind of fun. All right. Anything else you want to throw in there, bring up, chat about while we have time left?
No, I just wanted to bring up the Leon Draisaitl thing. That's it.
All right. Well, then, thanks again, everybody, for tuning into this week's episode of Fantasy Forecheck. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your preferred listening channel and to the Hockey Writers podcast and YouTube pages where you can find anything and everything else hockey related. You can always follow me on Twitter at Strozyk7.
And I'm there at Jacob Billington.
And you can feel free to drop us a like, leave a comment, and we will keep you up to date on all things fantasy throughout this season. And thanks again, everybody, for watching. We will see you next time.